and we'll move on to tonight's presentation from Dr. Rod, who's been a long-standing committee member. I think I'll just give you a bit of background for Dr. Rod before I introduce his topic. So Dr. Rodney Staples is a communications engineer, an engineering tertiary educator with a special interest in broadcasting technology and applications. His electronics career began in the Australian Army Signal Corps as an electronics technician, working with high-power transmitters and data communications equipment. He went on to work as a communications technician in the government department and computer field service engineer before taking up teaching electronics and communications technology and completing his professional communications engineering course, qualifying as a certified professional engineer in the Institution of Engineers Australia, now retired. Rodney was a senior member of the Institution of Radio and Electronics Engineers and is a life member of SMPTE and AES. Rodney developed further education courses in audio technology and measurement focus, and in audio production, operations focus, in an engineering faculty. He accredited these courses, contributing to their integration into more generic multi-year programs, which eventually morphed into production-orientated audio and multimedia courses in arts faculties. Rodney's research interests concentrate on the use of multimedia and computer-based technology in tertiary teaching and learning in the time before the internet. He maintains an interest in the history of the audio industry in Victoria. And indeed, in the time before the internet, I think if we, as a committee, we don't use so much AI resources, but Dr. Rod sitting in there in the committee is often a great point of reference. He's like the continual phone a friend. If there's a topic we need more information, he's there to enlighten us all. So tonight, he'll be giving us a presentation on editing in MP4 and Audio Synch, diagnosing and fixing audio sync problems. The topic introduces a brief overview of the construction of MP4 file structures and the difference between MP4 files and streaming MP4. Brief outline of MP4 comparison leads to how the network abstraction layers construction and what this means for packaging of audio video within the transport stream, and what this means for audio synchronization and the constraints for editing. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Dr. Rod to take us into that presentation. Thank you, Dr. Rod.
Thank you, Paolo. Can anyone see me yet?
Indeed, we can. Well, that's and hear you clearly.
That's good. I'm not seeing it here. I'm talking about video tonight, although it's an audio engineering society, but I want to get to the audio bit because that's where the system seems to break most often. You may have noticed that in the last 12 months or so, well, since last November or so, the broadcast TV has been changing to add more channels. And you may also notice in the last month or so, some of the free-to-air television has actually improved its colour gamut. And the reason that that's happened is that they have stopped using MPEG-2 as the broadcast medium and switched entirely to MPEG-4, and it's the streaming version, MPEG-4 version 10 or H.264, the ITU designation of the same thing, which is the same format that the messaging applications use, like Zoom. Now, while I'm talking about my experience with Zoom, which has been initially disastrous, what I'm talking about has application right across television broadcasting, so the same conditions apply broadly. But I'm not going too far into the video stuff. If you really want to follow up on that in detail, you're welcome to go to the ITU-T H.264, H.265 standards. They're online. And if you can wade through all 80 pages of mathematics, you're welcome to have a go at that. I balked at that and looked at what I needed to and then left the rest. So I'm not an expert in that area. However, I will be starting with the structure of the MPEG-4 file structure and zooming the streaming version, which is different, how that is packaged. So that implies something about compression, but I won't be going too deeply into that. And then what that means for how it's packaged on what's called the network abstraction layer, which is basically the structure of the transport stream that goes out. And it's that causes the problems for editing the audio compared with the video. It's that where the audio tends to get lost or slipped against the video, causing the sync problems. Now, I will try to share, if I can. My slide set. Now, this is the basic file format for an MPEG-4 file structure. It started with Apple, way back when Apple started using MPEG-4, and you'll see it's loosely based on data communication protocol standards that can trace their history back to HDLC frames. It starts off with a file header box that tells you what the file is about. There's a free block that if it has a 1 in it, it means that the whole file is rejected. Otherwise, it has nothing in it. Some people may use that to put other data in, but the players are all expected to ignore that. There's the MDAT box or atom, that is the data box, that is usually written after the file is completed. So if the MDAT is missing, then you can't read the file. And then there's the MOV box, MOOV, which is the actual movie information. And that has data about what's in the file itself. MPEG-4 was originally designed for file transfer. It has a header that tells you what's in the file, and you need that to make sense of what's in the data. But if the file gets interrupted for any reason, then the move box is not written. It's extremely difficult, if not impossible, to recover. I've never been able to recover a file if that box is missing. When streaming started, which we can go back to the online systems, there had to be a different version because you couldn't rely on an hour program being downloaded before you could watch it. You had to watch it in little pieces. So the HTTP live streaming is an adaptive bitrate streaming communication protocol built on MPEG-4 that works by breaking the overall stream into a sequence of small file downloads, each a small chunk with information in it that tells you what's in that file. And you can actually recover bits and pieces of a file even if the total file box isn't written at the end. And it's called fragmented MP4, and it looks a bit like this. You've got the original blocks up the front, but instead of having a single movie file, the MDAT file, you now have a whole lot of little MDAT files that are broken up into fragments and many, many frames. And each of those boxes has as much or as little data as is needed to convey the movie. The problem is they're not all the same size because each of those boxes depends on how much compression and how much movement and so forth is in each of the little segments. Whoops. So when you come to make up the video stream, there are two parts that make it up. One is the video coding layer, which is where the compression happens, or most of the compression happens, and it contains the coded video, audio, and metadata if you've got metadata in the stream. That could be your subtitles or whatever. And there's the network abstraction layer, which carries the frames packaged as slices of roughly uniform size. Now, the network abstraction layer slice may contain one frame, or it might contain several frames. It's packaged to make up the size of the slice rather than a frame-oriented packaging. And both layers impact on editing decision on synchronization within the video. So what's the architecture look like? Here it is. The video coding layer is where most of the compression takes place, and that's the inter and intra-frame compression. It's a bit like JPEG. It is more like motion JPEG in films. The control information is packaged in those header frames that tells you how the file is constructed and tells you where to find all the bits and pieces. And that's all packaged together into the network abstraction layer, which is what is put on the network as the streaming data. In the video coding layer, this is where most of the compression happens. It's made up of 3 types of frames, and you may see MPEG-4 described as avatar-driven. Well, it's driven as avatars because it actually only transmits full frames every so often. And they're called iframes, and they are key or reference frames within the video. The other 2 types of frames are derived from the previous iframes, and they tend to provide just the difference between the reference frame and the frame that comes after it. That means you don't send most of the frame, you only send a little bit of it. And if you really want to get rid of most of the data, you use bidirectional or B frames, which is where the data for the frame that you're going to see is derived from the frames before or after it. And there could be 1 frame before, 1 frame after, or 2 frames before, 2 frames after. And that's where a lot of the compression really happens because you're still only sending differences. The problem with having the frames after the I frame or the P frame, the reference frames, is that you have to actually record the whole sequence of frames in a buffer memory and then reconstruct the order, which slows down the whole process of reading it, which means that you need a faster computer to actually reconstruct the frames. And it depends on how big the sequence of frames is, how much buffer memory you need, and how slow is the process of reconstructing the video frames. The reference frames can be I frames or P frames, but the P frames have to be reconstituted in the buffer before they can use for the following B frame. The reference frames are generally sent in display order, and programs like Zoom do send I and P frames mostly, or that's what they're doing. But they're in the early stages, I got caught because they were sending B frames as well, and I was using a computer that didn't have enough buffer memory to store them properly. The B frames have to be sent out of display order because you need all the other frames before them to be able to reconstruct the sequence. Therefore, you need the buffer, and it's the whole group of pictures that is needed between 2 iframes, not just 4 or 5 iframes. It can be up to 350 iframes. So how is the picture coded? Well, what you're looking at now is a frame from that very first video of Graham Huon. And I've selected one macro block. This is an 8x8 macro block, but there are smaller ones and bigger macro blocks. And what you can see is a boundary, and it shows the boundary between Graham's black shirt and the white door that's behind him, or the cream door that's behind him. And what you'll see is it's basically a triangle with black on one side and grey on the other side with a boundary in between. That's an avatar. If you send the triangle and send the difference in the colour density, then you don't have to send all of the data for each of those blocks. So It's a very short way of removing a lot of data, but still retaining the quality of the picture. The other way of doing this is to actually compress that using something like a discrete cosine transform, which I won't go into, which is like a Fourier transform. And what that does is it bunches all the high-level components, blocks, in one corner of the macro block and leaves a whole lot of zero data after that, which can then be run-length coded and basically deleted. The compression comes when you say, well, there's only one or two blocks right down the end of this run-length coded sequence. We'll just delete them. And that's throwing away some data. One of the points that I want to make, and this has come up several times in our discussions, is that if you're dealing with a macro block and you record this at, say, the standard definition format, when you reconstitute this at a higher level, if you have the right software to reconstitute the video, you can actually make a macro block that sort of looks the same, uses the same data, but has an apparently higher resolution. So you can work with standard definition video and upconvert it. It doesn't come up to high definition, but it looks pretty good. So it is the coding within MPEG-4 that allows you to get relatively high resolution from low resolution images in the transport stream. That's the example that I've used. This is an iframe. As you can see, everything in the picture is there. There is a bit of blur around Graham, but if you look at the background, you'll see that that is relatively sharp. The blur that you see around Graham isn't a resolution issue, it's because Graham has moved slightly. There's a P frame. What you can see is the background hasn't changed, but he has moved, and therefore there's data to be sent. So that's sending the data for the bits that are shown clear there. And that's a B frame. That's bidirectionally coded. As you can see, there isn't a lot of data to send. So again, they've reduced the density of the data and therefore the transmission. There is another thing that happens within video, and that is as movement takes place, the macro block that represents, say, the edge of my glasses will move, but it might only move a couple of pixels from where it was before. If you know where it's moved to, you don't need to send the macro block either in a coded form or any other way. You just send a motion vector that says where it's moved to. And this is the motion vectors for the most recent video production. And that's showing John Smythe actually moving as he moved in the picture. So each of those little arrows is one of those macro blocks that's moved slightly. Now, putting this all together, you have groups of pictures that are structures based on these frame sequences. And how many are determined by the frame rate, 12 groups of pictures, 12 frames in a group of friction, or half a second for 24 frames a second. Or if you're running 30 frames a second, there's 15 frames for movies. For Zoom, again, where I started running into trouble, these groups of pictures can be as high as 250, and I've seen 320 in recent recordings, which means that you get an iframe every 320th frame, and every other frame between that and the next one is actually a reconstructed frame. What does this look like when you see the frame sequence? Well, here you can see, if I can work this out. Whoops. I can't go back. Hold on, I'm just trying to find that. There it is. What you can see here is a sequence of frames that shows the brown bars are the I frames, the big blue bars are P frames, and the little blue bars are the B frames, B frames. So there's a group of pictures there, and the sequence is IP, IBB, BP, BB, B, I. That group of pictures is 15, I think, for that particular sequence, which is consistent with a movie format, not a streaming format. And the data has gone into a buffer and has been reconstructed. Now, what this means is that if you're editing, you have to start your edit at an I frame, because if you start with a B frame, you've got to get data from both sides of it, and it may not be available yet. So if you try to scrub through your sequence to find it, you'll find you end up with black screens, and you cut at where you think a point is, an edit point is, and you get a glitch when you try to reconstruct the video. The problem is that frames are all of unequal length because it depends on the content, what you've got in them. The frame header identifies the length. The new frame starts when the previous frame ends. If the declared frame length and actual frame size are different, then the frame is lost. And if a lost frame is a key frame, then the whole group of pictures is lost. Now, this is bad enough. You lose 15 or 12 frames. It's half a second. In video, that's not really all that bad usually. But if you've got a group of pictures, a group of pictures that is 320 long, then you're losing 6 minutes, 6 seconds, which is noticeable. Okay, the Zoom data streams are H.264 or MPEG-4 version 10. The bandwidth is dynamically adapted to the available channel. So if you dial into a channel, Zoom looks at the channel characteristics as part of your logon procedure and says, you've got a wide bandwidth and we can accommodate that, so we'll give you the best quality we can. But if it sees that you've got a less than adequate bandwidth in the channel, it says, well, we can't give you the best quality, so we'll give you the standard definition and do as best we can. The standard, the free version that I use is limited to 640 by 360, which is the digital format for standard definition. And it's also the lowest level that can be recorded on the paid version. If you want to get to 1280 by 720, which used to be the case for the paid version of Zoom, then you have to go to Zoom and tell them why you want it, and you have to work with their sysads to get it incorporated. You can only get 1920 by 1280 if you have the fully paid enterprise version, which is quite expensive. And that's the version that most of the broadcasters would probably be using, although they are still limited to whatever is on the client side. So if the client side connection is a poor connection, you will still get standard definition video inserted in your news program when you're using a Zoom connection to your interviewee. The standard frame rates are 24 frames a second, 25 frames a second, and 30 frames a second, and that just depends on who sets the session up. If you select Use HD Video and the video property is turned on, then even in the free version, you will see on the screen, as you probably are seeing tonight, the 1280 by 720 version, but you can only record 640 by 360. So I suspect Peter's recording will only be that lower level. However, what I've been able to show is that if you upconvert and use a reasonable upconversion program, the result at even 1920 by 1280 is usually quite acceptable. Okay, so the transport stream consists of a series of slices containing the audio, the video, and other metadata like subtitles. A typical file might have a video slice sequence of ID equals 0 and an audio slice equals ID equals 1, or it might be 1 and 2, whatever the program is set up to provide, and that will be in those header boxes that we talked about before. A well-formed transport stream will look something like this. Unfortunately, I can't use this software anymore because it was free, but it's now been locked behind a paywall. But what this shows is the blue frames of the video, and you can see I've expanded one frame and you can see header information in that slice, and the green frames of the audio. Now, this is a well-formed transport stream, so the audio centers a block, the video centers a block, and the spacing between them is relatively consistent over the course of the program. The difference between a slice and a frame, a slice may contain one video frame or a lot of video frames, or you might need several frames to make up one slice, depending on the amount of data in each series of pictures. The reference or keyframes are intracoded, fully frames, effectively JPEG-coded data. The predicted frames or bidirectionally coded frames contain difference data taken from both sides of the wanted file. These frame structures are packaged into what's called the Network Abstraction Layer slices, which is what the transport stream is made up from. So what happens if you lose a frame? Well, the loss of a keyframe can lose the whole group of pictures. As I said, 6 seconds is a lot of data to lose. Because the timestamps are lost as well, you lose audio sync. So you might get the audio, but not the pictures. Or you might get the pictures, but not the audio. Or the audio might be separated from the pictures in some way. Loss of a P frame can cause degradation of the signal quality, but can be masked in the player. And loss of a B frame is less significant because there's not a lot of data lost, and you can just use adjacent frames to reconstruct something approximating that frame. Some resync can occur if the replay restarts at the next keyframe. So you'll often see on broadcast television, for example, the interview loses sync for a while, and then a couple of seconds later, lo and behold, it's resynced again. That's because the next iframe has come along and it's resynced from there. The audio and video is resynced from there. So how do you fix this or work with it? Well, first of all, you don't use Clip Champ, which is native to Windows systems and freely available, because it will only cut on iframes, and it doesn't allow you to sync the audio against the video. So editing is very, very crude. You can do fades and wipes and add stuff to the video. It's good enough for simple production, but not good enough for restoring the video after a major calamity. Professional editing software is now available free. When I first got my good computer, I started, I started using Media Composer because that was available free from Avid. And I had been using the Pinnacle software before that, which is pretty close to what the professional software could do anyway. And Avid sort of made it so difficult to use. And when I had a computer with a 4K screen, you couldn't actually read the screen details because it was so compressed on the screen. Made it very difficult to use, and it had to be connected to the internet to even be able to use it. But what happened when I got into this process is I found that DaVinci released a cut-down version of their professional software. I say cut down because basically the only thing that's missing is a few effects that I probably would never use in a lifetime, and the AI applications that it is capable of, in particular some of the video noise reduction and so forth. So that's my go-to system. But there are also other systems. Kden Live is another possible system that is designed for Linux, but it works in Windows and Apple computers, and it has most of the functionality that Resolve has. and there are a couple of others that I'll mention later. Now, all of the professional editors have large buffers, if the computer will support them. And they all have the capacity to separate the audio and video, and therefore slip the audio and video and cut them separately, so that you can slip the audio under the video or the video over the audio, or whatever you want to do to synchronize them again. So if you're going to synchronize the film, the production stuff that you'll probably be familiar with if you're into the film world is using time code or a clapperboard at the start of a shot, and where the two images meet and the clap happens, that's where you start your sound tape and your pictures. On streaming video, you don't have the benefit of that. There is some time stamps in the video, and they're used by the system, but they're not easy to access in the editor. So what you have to do is you have to find references within the video itself and the audio to figure out what the synchronization is doing. And that's not quite so easy as it sounds. You have to look for things like door closing, clapping hands, plosives in the speech like P, B, T, and you pick those clues up and try to match their corresponding sound in the soundtrack to those vision frames. And you can be out by 3 or 4 frames before people start noticing the sync error. Now, the editor software doesn't store all of the video. It only stores a list of where to find the material in the video that's stored elsewhere on the computer, and it loads what it needs at the time of doing the editing. These decision lists take up little space, and they don't affect the resource material. They load the relevant bits when they need it. And the editor software, depending on what you're using, maintains a buffer around the view that you're looking at, so that you can scrub through the sequence, seeing the restored frames. The problem with streaming video is that normally you can only scrub forward, because you need that iframe to start the sequence, and you need to build the internal frames from that reference frame. If you try to scrub backwards, particularly in those long groups of pictures, you haven't got an iframe to build from, and what you see is either the B frame data, which isn't very much, or a black screen. So scrubbing to find your edit point is actually quite difficult unless you reduce the group of pictures to something like the 12 or 5 group of pictures in a movie format. So in double system, yeah, I've talked about that. So where do you cut? Well, I said if you're working with something like Clipchamp, you've got to cut on an iframe because it won't let you do anything else. If the cut occurs in the middle of a group of pictures, the whole group of pictures is lost, and you can lose half a second up to 6 seconds. Professional editors, because they load the whole group of pictures, the whole sequence is available frame by frame, fully reconstructed, so you can scrub through that sequence once it's loaded, and when you make an edit decision, it inserts a new keyframe at the edit point. And this is an example from that Graham Huon video where you can see the 15 sequence where it uses I and B frames, but it comes to an edit point, and gee whiz, there's a new iframe added, and then the sequence recommences and goes 15 frames in the group of pictures. And in this bar up here, you can see that each of those blocks is 15, which means that you're dealing with a group of pictures that is stable at 15 for the whole movie. This is a raw zoom file with a variable group of pictures sequence. I started this in 260, 99, 98, 77, 136, 163, and up here 368, 82, 62. What we're dealing with, in this case, it's either I frames or P frames. There's no B frames in this lot, so it will play out in real time quite happily. But there's no reference frame. You've got to actually have all of those frames leading up to the frame that you're looking at if you want to see the sequence. This works fine for real-time streaming video. You can't look backwards in a real-time stream. Makes sense. But if you're trying to edit this, if you try to edit in the middle of that, then you've got to have that whole group of pictures, a whole 368 that I see before, in the buffer so that you can scrub through it and find your edit point and allow the editor system to reinstall a new iframe. What does the raw stream from a source look like? Large dropouts, variable iframe position, variable group of pictures, mix of IBB frames, large numbers of missing frames, doesn't allow for rear seeking, and the audio sequencing is easily lost. And this is the network abstraction layer for the Zoom stream that got me into trouble. As you can see, video and audio is still interleaved in these slices, but they are sort of randomly appearing, some in big blocks, some in small blocks, wherever they happen to appear. This is not so easy to work with, and it can mean that you've actually lost large blocks of pictures, which means that synchronization is no longer available. The other transmission problems that you encounter is low bandwidth limits and resolution. Limits within the transmission limit that's set by Zoom or whatever system you're using. The customer premises equipment might be poor. We were talking before the session about using the webcams, and now with new laptops, the laptop camera is actually better than some of the webcams that we've been using up until now. In fact, I'm using a webcam in my laptop now instead of a high quality webcam that I was using previously. The other problem can be network congestion. If you're dealing with an overseas connection, this can be particularly problematic. It's not such a problem now with the large rollout of fibre to the curb and fibre to the home. But before then, when we're not relying on copper connections, the network connection was very bad. And it can happen. Somebody hasn't got fibre yet. Okay, you still want their information. You put up with the quality you get from Zoom because they've restricted it at their end. If you work with the free session, you only get 40 minutes at a time. So to record an hour video, you've got to record several of these 40-minute segments and then put them together. The problem with doing that is that each segment is individually assessed when you log on. So it may be limited to 1280 by 720 or 360 by 640 or whatever Zoom decides it's going to give you. So you may have variable frame rates, variable data rates, and variable quality from segment to segment. How do you resolve that? My go-to now is to use a conversion program immediately I get the raw video. I keep the raw video, but I up-convert it from whatever the recording happens to be it standard definition or 720p. I up-convert it to 1080p. And in doing that, I actually reconstitute some of the resolution that was in the original source. Not completely accurately, but enough to be reasonable quality. And it also preserves as much as possible of the groups of picture sequence and the timestamp information that keeps the audio synchronized. Why do we use MP4 coding? Well, because it can be up-converted easily. If you're watching streaming video from most Australian free-to-air television, for example, they send 1290 by 720, or 1280 by 720 it should be. They send that quality video out because that's what's on their servers, and it's up converted in your television to give you the full high definition, and it looks quite reasonable on most occasions. So what do you need to do video editing and audio editing? Well, first of all, forget the simple editors. You need to have a reasonable quality video editor. The versions that I talk about are DaVinci Resolve, Shotcut, or Kdenlive. The last two were designed for Linux, and they are multi-use. So you can use them on Apple, in Linux, in Windows. DaVinci Resolve does have an Apple version, and it does have because it was designed for Apple, and it does have a Windows version that works quite well. The Linux version, though, was designed for one particular flavour of Linux, and from version 20 on, I think, you have to go through a whole lot of hoops to get it to run in Linux. It will run on Linux and works fine when it does run, but you've got to add a whole lot of program pieces that have been left out of the latest versions of Linux, which makes it difficult to use in that environment. DaVinci Resolve supports audio editing to sample level using the Fairlight component that is built into it. And it works in that sense like most other audio editors, digital audio workstations. The other editors, Kdenlive, for example, and Shotcut, only allow audio editing down to frame level, not to sample level. So removing clicks and pops becomes problematic in those editors, but DaVinci and Resolve can actually get down to individual segments, and you can use the pen in Resolve to remove the click. The Fairlight digital audio workstation is a Fairlight digital audio workstation that David would remember from his time at Fairlight. It's the same one, it's just built into the Resolve now. Kdenlive has video and audio. It's a little bit harder to use, but it's still effective for doing most of what you want to do by slipping audio against the video. Working with Zoom is essentially working in a double system environment where you've got the audio and the video separate. You've got to match the two up. It's matched up when you catch the original, it should be matched up when you catch the original video, but you don't have a clapperboard to synchronize it. You just have to rely on your whole file being synchronized for the whole time. If it's not, and any error can cause loss of sync, then you have to resync it, and that is a case of going back, finding where the error is, and finding where the sound is, and slipping the audio the number of frames that is needed to bring the sound back into sync again. It's with a normal video frame, 12 or 15 frames is sort of a limit. 3 or 4 is not unusual, but that's quite easy to find. When you're dealing with 368 frames of error, it can be quite disconcerting sometimes to actually find where your video and your audio match. So what's the resync process? First of all, you've got to find where the sync is lost. That means playing it over and over again until you know that the sync has disappeared. Sometimes that's easy, sometimes it's not so easy. Then you have to look for plosives either before or after that, preferably after, or recognisable impulses like clapping hands or door slams or whatever, to determine the number of frames that the picture precedes or follows the sound for that sync point, and note that number of frames. Then you have to separate the audio and video frames, select the audio stream only and cut the audio at the last good frame, and then slip the audio to where it synchronises again. Generally, that will solve the problem. But then you have to watch and see if it's caused other problems further on in the program. And just fixing one sync error may actually introduce more sync errors later on. So doing this in small segments is probably more useful. Then you've got to check that the sync is restored, so that means you're going to watch it again and again and again. If you want to do audio restoration, I said Fairlight is pretty good, but it's not a DAW in the sense that, say, some of the other programs like Tenacity or Ocean Audio are. If you want to do that, you've got to actually finish your edit, take your audio stream and export it, making sure that you don't change the length of the audio stream. Put it into an digital audio workstation and do your signal processing, which might be equalization or noise reduction or whatever you want to do, and then re-import it back into the video. Most video editors will allow you to add additional audio tracks, and what I do is basically add it in addition to the existing audio track and just turn off the existing audio track and leave the processed audio track in place. So what is the advantage of using Zoom recordings if they're so hard to work with? Well, first of all is the convenience factor. Paolo mentioned that with our committee meetings, and Graham talked about it too. It means that you don't have to be in the same place at the same time. You can be in the comfort of your own home. And it's for the interviewee, it's convenient. They're working with their own facilities, their own equipment. They don't have to think too hard or do too much work. And then you have a conversation as you would normally have if you were face-to-face, but all the time recording the result. It normally allows for free-flowing discussion, just talking as we normally do, rather than having a formal interview, which is more akin to the historical oral history process of letting people talk about their lives in the way they want to talk about it, not the way that you've designed a sequence. Raw capture can be achieved in about the time required for the discussion, so you're not tying up a person's time for any longer than you need to. And if they're prepared to give you an hour, 2 hours, or whatever time is available, you're not imposing your will too much on top of that. And if you have the paid version, you record the whole thing in a continuous session. I've never found more than 3 sessions necessary in the free version to get adequate coverage for an hour or more. What are the disadvantages? Well, the video resolution is variable because Zoom changes it. It depends on the bandwidth of the available channel. Audio backgrounds and environments are uncontrolled. They're whatever you have in your house as the interviewee, and we're not going to go out of our way to have you audio process your room to remove reflections or anything like that. Although these days most households are actually reasonably good acoustic environments, and the noise cancelling that's in the Zoom program itself or in most computer systems is actually quite good. Transmission errors result in significant signal losses requiring extensive post-production. It's not as much of a problem the more people have fibre to the home, but on international connections, for example, it can be problematic, or in busy business times. Switching between speakers is essentially controlled by the Zoom application, as you're seeing in this meeting tonight. While I'm speaking, I'm the focus of your attention. But if somebody else was to speak, then they would become the focus of attention, and Zoom controls that switch. So what are the alternatives? We can do single camera and in-camera audio. We saw that at the Synth Temple exercise, where a camera was set up on a tripod, pointed at the speaker, and a perfectly satisfactory recording was made of the entire presentation. No switching was necessary. What switching happened was when people moved in front of the camera. The audio was taken directly from the surrounding sound, and it was in a recording studio, so the acoustics were superb. Works well. It works for recording lectures as well. You can use a single camera or double system audio where you separate the audio and the video out. Probably these days you'd have in-camera audio as well as the double system audio with radio mic or a separate microphone. But then you have to resync it separately later, and a clapperboard or time code of some sort will be helpful But again, you get back into that problem of having to resync sound and video. And last but not least is the multi-camera with embedded audio. And we see this at Collards where they have several cameras, but you have a vision switcher who is switching between the cameras, and it's up to them to decide what's the relevant pictures. And this is the sort of thing that broadcasters use all the time. So why do we use Zoom? Well, it captures individual pictures in nearly real time. And as an ethnographer, I can say it's a phenomenographic capture. That is, we're allowing people to talk about their own experiences in their own way, and how they talk about it and what they think is important is more important than anything the interviewee has to say. We've already demonstrated with the AES meetings that Zoom provides global access where it wasn't available to us before. Graham mentioned Tomlinson Holman coming in from America. We've had the inventor of REW software talk from Ireland. These people would not have been accessible to us without Zoom. Post-COVID, almost everybody has a universal fibre rollout, which minimises the requirements for copper. And these days, because of COVID and the things we had to live through there, most people have the hardware and software that allows Zoom conversations, if nothing else, even if it's just a mobile phone. But most people have a mobile phone these days with sufficient technology on board to be able to make a Zoom connection. The software is free and can produce relatively high quality depending on the personal context of the interviewee, the environment and the equipment. The emphasis is on capturing the interviewee's perceptions and experience rather than emphasising production values, and it's suitable for contemporaneous information capture. Okay, I've finished. I now throw the questions open for questions.
I want to say very quickly there, Dr. Rod, thank you very much for a very enlightening presentation, making what is a very complex topic quite digestible for even someone like myself who doesn't really have a lot of the in-depth understanding of the complexities of those types of file formats. And I also want to say that it's clear by the way you've presented that your teaching background has come to the forefront in translating, as I said, something very, very complex into something that is very easy to follow, relatively easy. And I got a bit worried at one stage when you started to mention cosine and Fourier series. I thought, oh no, we're in trouble, but you brought it back in very quickly. So thank you for that. And as Dr. Rod said, if there are any questions from the floor, please feel free to add them in the chat or put your hand up or some way to make us aware.
I'm sure Lloyd would be thoroughly familiar with the double system sound.
I do have one sort of question or suggestion that's come to mind, and it's around the clapperboard. And I was wondering what your thoughts might be if there is an opportunity for a virtual clapperboard, maybe at a frequency that could be edited out, to be used purely for production type people that intended to use the stream for post-production. Is there an idea in the making there?
I think it's already available.
Okay.
Because they use, in the modern clapperboards, they actually use timecode. So they've got timecode in the picture. The timecode is recorded on the audio as well. And the clapperboard performs its usual function. And that's recorded in double system and in-camera editing and production.
And could I just add there that clapperboard is occasionally used for artistic purposes as well. I've seen on the ABC several times an interview start with the interviewee taking a seat and getting comfortable, and then a pair of hands and a clapperboard going click in front and then backing out. For some,
Hmm.
every now and then they actually leave that in.
Yeah,
So, hmm,
it is an artistic reason. There's no need for it because then they're probably recording the sound
hmm,
simultaneously, and that will be timecode linked, whether they're using
yes.
double system or not. But the broadcasters have a lot of advantages that we don't have. Their cameras are anything up to $100,000. So their resolution, the color gamut they use, and all those sorts of things are vastly different. The audio that they use, they're using wireless microphones most often. They use lighting that we don't have access to because they use those big LED 10 light effectively now. They have switched video or multiple cameras so they can switch it later, which we don't have the opportunity to do. So they have a lot of advantages that we don't have.
Just one other thing, I'm absolutely amazed at the capabilities that Zoom and I suppose its brothers and sisters and forebears have to cope with varying channel width in real time and still produce a reasonable result on the other side.
It's
It's
not
stunning.
coping with it in real time. It's part of the setup sequence. So every time
Okay.
you dial in, it says log in. It says it's waiting. What the Zoom is doing is it's checking the bandwidth back in the channel. So it's running a sequence, checking the channel. And then when it logs you in, it says you can only get the standard definition version, or you can only get the high definition version, or you can get the high definition version. And if you log out and log back in again, it goes through the whole sequence again. But once you're logged in, it tries to maintain that standard for that session.
Hmm. So if it does end up in a sort of a strangulation scenario or you know, an empty buffer, you will see some disturbance.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Right.
If you end up with a buffer, yeah.
Yep.
Okay, very good. Thanks for that, Greg. Um, any other comments that anyone might like? Observations, comments, questions?
I have a comment. I was looking up MP4 and kind of the history, going back to MPEG 1, layer 2, which became MP2. They called it MP2, but it's MPEG 1 layer, audio layer 2, Roman numeral 2. And then MP3, MPEG 1 audio layer 3. But MP4 jumped to MPEG 4 part 14, nothing to do with the previous, MP MP1, MP2, MP3. So it's just an interesting, it's a bit like 5G now. It's in consumer land, it's completely confused between cellular 5G, the fifth generation, mobile, and then 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi. That people get totally confused. So I just thought I'd look back on the story of MP4, and it's not MPEG 2 layer 4, it's actually MPEG 4 part 14, just to be clear.
MP4 part 14 is up to 8K resolution, and it's H.265 in the ITU standard. The one that they're broadcasting is actually MP4 version 10,
Aha.
which is H.264, and it has a slightly different color gamut and a lower resolution. So it works up to 4K. H.265 works up to 8K. But you're right, the MPEG 4 version 14 is a complete standard in its own right.
Righto. Thank you.
All 80
Thanks for
pages.
that, David. That was a great insight. Okay. I think if we have no other comments, questions, well, I want to add my thanks again to Dr. Rod. It's quite a a decent amount of investment there for that. And I know that you've lived and breathed this subject for a long time. I hate to think how many times you've viewed videos over and the same video and the same video section over and over to determine the sync problem. That mind boggles, So thank you very much. Also, a lot of effort into the preparation, the slides, the graphics. Those don't appear overnight. They take a lot of work and careful preparation. So, Cynthia, thank you, Dr. Rod, for sharing those with us.